First of all, let me just apologize. I know this video is a bit behind schedule once again. I won't get into the reason per se, but let me just say that if you are coming to Japan and someone offers you torisashi, that is raw chicken, and you may want to think twice before saying yes. I should have known better. Having been in country for about 15 years, I've said no on numerous occasions, but I trusted the situation, and well, anyone can make a mistake. Anyway, it can be pretty intimidating buying a house anywhere. And when you decide to buy one halfway across the world, you might be even a little bit more nervous. I mean, who wouldn't? Yet the rush of people buying property in Japan has led to a national increase in property values, as well as local property values and taxes absolutely skyrocketing in areas like Nagano, where I live, Okinawa, and certainly Tokyo. So there are people out there doing it, and there are people out there helping them. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about those helpers, how to connect with them. Do you really need them? Hi, I'm Paul Duran, longtime resident of Japan, and these are my adventures in Japanese real estate. So you might ask yourself, should I get an agent if I want to buy a house in Japan? And the answer is complicated. The short answer is actually there are no official buyer's real estate agents in Japan. So if you do employ someone to help you purchase a property, there is no guarantee that they will know what they're doing or that they'll have your best interests in mind. You are not likely to find an official agent, official seller's agent, who will work with you, but you might be able to befriend a seller's agent who will be more than happy to contact you when a property that maybe comes to your liking comes across their desk. This is not always easy because agents really rarely speak English, and in order to develop that kind of relationship, you're going to need to be close by, or at the very least, probably you'll need to be in country. So if you don't live in Japan, but you still want to find a house, you can hire what has come to be known as a proxy buyer. A proxy is basically a person you authorize as a representative that ideally helps with language issues, provides some real estate and structural, like architectural expertise, maybe understands the process of buying and selling a little bit, and they'll make the process go smoother. They should, at the very least, know the steps in legally buying a house and closing and registering the sale. And they should also be able to work with the various scriveners and city offices that can push the buying process through. That means their language is going to have to be pretty advanced. However, most Akiyas must be bought in cash, so you're not likely to need any help with a bank. The truth is, I can't really vouch for any proxies per se, but I do know some people who are pretty well versed in Japanese real estate who've served in this capacity in the past. I also have on several occasions myself. So you can find people who advertise themselves as proxy buyers online and certainly on YouTube. And I'm sure that these people are very reliable for the most part. But if you choose to go through a proxy, remember that it is completely buyer beware. There is no licensing, no qualifications, no requirements for this job. Strictly speaking, it's not really a job at all. It's a service that people can choose to offer on a freelance basis. And if you do decide to go the route of working with a proxy, I might recommend reaching out to English-speaking property managers in the area where you're looking. Some of these property managers may be willing and even interested in helping out, especially in the more resort areas in Japan. And if you're in the market for a vacation or part-year home, a resort area might be the perfect place to look. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in this video and in future videos. But for now, keep in mind that property managers in these resort areas may be a little bit pricey. There's no established rates for this kind of work, and it's kind of a gold rush at the moment. So proxies might take advantage of the situation. Just look closely, interview carefully, find the person who you trust and who you believe will be out there with your best interests at heart. And what kind of advice will you need? Part of that, of course, depends on whether you're in Japan or not, and you can actually get to the properties for inspection. Let's think first about buyers who are looking for nearby properties and you have the means to look at these properties yourself. Or maybe you have a proxy buyer who can shoot a video for you. Obviously, just seeing a property yourself can have a huge effect on the decision to buy or not. And I know there are people out there buying properties sight unseen, and more power to them, but there are always surprises. And no matter how good or bad the pictures on the website are, the actual house is likely to be usually a little bit worse. However, if you're close by and you can look at a property, don't hesitate to check properties with poor advertisements or bad pictures, or have your proxy buyer have a look. Because if you've already scrolled around on some of the websites that I mentioned in the last episode, you may have been shocked at some of the bad staging and bad photography of these houses. I mean, bad pictures are a hallmark of Japanese real estate, and this is even more true with the Akiyas and cheap sells. Remember, the seller's agents that are hooked to these are not really very motivated to put a lot of effort into it. And so they just don't have the kind of resources that we see with other properties. I've seen a few diamonds in the rough, however, and so you may want to check those out. Even though they look bad in the pictures, there may be something really, really worthwhile to see in that house. A lot of times these sellers are just not motivated to put that effort in, and the owner just wants to wash their hands of the whole affair. So they'll sell the houses with everything in them. I mean, including family pictures and memorabilia, and sometimes really valuable things. And sometimes the houses are actually in great shape, but they're just basically a hassle for everybody involved and hardly worth the pittance they earn. Another problem is inexperienced agents will often be the ones who are representing these houses, and they're going to sit at the bottom of the firm's representation list. So people are not going to be representing them very well. The only exception is if the seller has other more valuable places that they'd also like to unload. And you want to beware of that situation because the seller's agents will often be far more motivated to work with that kind of seller to get the property off the market and sold as soon as possible. And that rarely means aggressive bargaining on your behalf. More often, it means pushing potential buyers to commit to the purchase quickly, even if that means a few unresolved issues and vague promises. So you really want to avoid those types of situations. And I'll talk more about that in a future video too. But while it's never a good idea to jump at a first prospect, it's also true that the market is getting pretty active at the moment, relatively speaking, especially if you're looking in resort areas. So let's talk a little bit about these resorts. If you're a non-resident or a part-time resident of Japan and you're just looking for a home away from home, as I mentioned before, I would really recommend looking in these resort areas because there are some additional costs potentially and some pitfalls to these areas, but there are some really great advantages too, especially for that part you're resident. An advantage to a resort area is that there are often many property managers around who can take care of your house when you're not there, and also other property owners who might be willing to do that too. There can also be onsen water rights that can be purchased. So for a fee anywhere from a couple of $100s to maybe a few $1,000s a year, you're going to have hot spring originated onsen water sent directly into your personal bathtub, and that's not bad. But you'll want to know if that's possible, or maybe even it's required in the area that you're buying, and you want to get it set up correctly. And that is another place where the proxy buyer should be able to help. On the downside of resorts, many neighborhoods in resort areas prohibit guest houses and Airbnbs, or they restrict them heavily. Not all of them. Some resort neighborhoods and towns do allow it, although it might be more strictly regulated or managed than you would prefer. Nonetheless, it is never encouraged, and the neighbors aren't going to like it, and it can cause friction with those neighbors. So you want to keep in mind the distance between neighbors as well. In short, If Airbnbs is a revenue stream that you'd imagine for your house, you may want to consider alternatives to resort areas before jumping in. Another downside is that you'll likely be on the hook for a homeowner association fee. These fees are often a lot lower than HO fees, say in the US, for example, but you'll definitely want to have this researched by your proxy buyer and have a clear idea what those costs are going to be. Sometimes for a lump sum, you can also even opt out of the HOAs, but you might have neighborhood groups that you'll also be encouraged or compelled to join. So you'll want to know all of those costs at the beginning. To balance things out, however, another advantage to buying in a resort area is the likelihood that your land will retain more of its value or potentially even increase. So there are a number of factors that you want to weigh in on when you think about that resort area purchase. It is really important to understand what you're getting into when you buy a house in Japan. Houses generally depreciate in value, no matter what. At this point in time in Japan, houses are really like cars. The value drops with every year of ownership. Most Japanese prefer to buy the land and build their own house on the land. So your land might not actually depreciate and it might even appreciate, especially if you've bought land in a popular area. Land retains its value, but the house definitely won't. In other words, buying a house in Japan is important just because you want one, not because you're actually doing an investment. No investment could be worse than a house in Japan, frankly speaking, except maybe that car. Of course, if your plan is to rent out the house and it becomes an income property, that could be a much different story. But it's rare to make profit on a building by buying and selling a house. Flipping a house doesn't really work out very well, generally in Japan. If you and your proxy buyer are doing your homework, you can get comps on the land and try to make a very informed choice on the value. But comps are tough to get sometimes, especially in the rural areas. And often selling prices in rural areas are really all over the map. So, like anything you spend money on, you want to be diligent. Watch the market closely before you jump in. And if you're not nearby and you cannot watch the market or tour the houses, you may want to consider that proxy buyer after all, and you'll want to find one who really understands the area. You could also seek help of friends in Japan. They may be able to help you too. And if you come this far in the video, you know that there are going to be surprises around every corner. You and your proxy buyer need to know the right questions to ask to anticipate whatever problems you can. I want to get into a few of those key points to ask, a few of those key questions. Um, One of the questions I'll start off with, I guess, are both the land and the house for sale, or is it just the house? There are houses in Japan that are on leased land, and that property is probably a headache that you don't need. So you want to avoid that at all costs. Are the boundaries of the land registered? Often Japanese lands have been in the family for generations, and the boundaries were never really clearly drawn and registered. And this has to be done by either the buyer or the seller at a substantial expense if the land has not already been registered. So you got to keep that in mind. Are there any liens on the land? I actually once looked at a piece of land that had a private lien on it from a loan taken out more than 100 years ago. The lien meant that the land would never really fully be mine until the family of the lien holder would sign off on it. They could also collect on the loan in modern adjusted currency at any time from the new owner. We didn't even know who they were. We didn't know how to find them. It's pretty scary. It's likely that that lien was long forgotten, but no bank would ever touch that land until that lien was cleared up. So it's really important. Also, does the seller have the right to sell the land? Families will sometimes try to sell the land of incapacitated relatives, but this is actually illegal and the deal will not go through. So, can the house be torn down and rebuilt is another big question. Often houses don't have direct vehicle access to the roads, and that therefore they can't be torn down and rebuilt. They can only be renovated. And this type of land is honestly next to worthless, and you should really think hard before buying anything like that. Is there an HOA or neighborhood group that might require monthly or yearly fees? I mentioned that before. As you can see, the list can get pretty long. And in the next episode, I'm going to get into a lot more detail on this list and add quite a few more questions to it that you'll want answers from your proxy buyer or the seller's agents or sellers. Thanks for watching this week. I apologize for it being so late, and I do look forward to getting even deeper down this rabbit hole next week.